Thank you, and welcome to our audience. Well, today we're going to be talking about employee handbooks, perhaps a 2016 perspective. Of course, employee handbooks are something that we're constantly preparing in our organizations. Sometimes we wait a little bit longer, perhaps, than we would like, and go 2 or 3 years go by, and before we update the handbook. But as we move into now almost half year 2016, and we look at some of the legislation that was passed, particularly at the state level, we see that it's really time to at least update specific pages in the handbook, if not update the whole handbook. So we'll be talking about employee handbook. We'll have some time at the end to ask questions if you have any. Please feel free to participate. And so let's get started. So as we think about the scenario, in many organizations it's been 2 years since we last updated the employee handbook. We're now getting some employees that previously seemed uninterested in our handbook. You typically give it out at the time when the employee is new to the company or the organization, and now they will apply and perhaps look at the handbook, then put it away and forget about it. But now we seem to have some that, while previously uninterested in their policies, they're now looking at the policies. As a matter of fact, some have asked us for a copy of the handbook. They seem to misplace it. They lost their handbook. And you begin to wonder why. Why all of a sudden is this interest in our employee handbook? Of course, that reminds you of how much fun you had in creating the handbook and updating it. Probably took 6 months, and that's not unusual, and particularly in designing and doing new handbooks. And as you thought to go through new revisions, you thought, well, maybe it's time we need to revise or perhaps redo our handbook. So in a meeting with your CEO, he wants to know, okay, is it time to update our handbook? And if you haven't updated it this year, in many states it is time. There are things you have to add, things you have to change. What are some of the new issues you should include? And what are some of the best practices you should consider in drafting and communicating your handbook? So what we're finding is it's not just enough to change some pages and put the handbook out. We need to think about the handbook, specifically changes in the working environment, changes in the workforce, methods of communicating. So it's more than just writing some new pages. So as we think about the handbook mission, what's the purpose of handbook? We see that it's the embodiment of the organization's value and culture in employee handbook. So important part then of the handbook is going to communicate the organization's value and cultures. It's going to provide an indication of the tone at the top. Now, for those of you that are internal auditors attending today, you're familiar with this term. This is a term used by internal auditors, and it gets the message of what management says about the organization. What are the key issues? And so an important part then of the employee handbook should communicate the tone at the top. What's important about this organization? What does management consider critical to the success of the organization? It should help choreograph the day-to-day employee activities and interactions. So what we want to make sure that is employees know not only that they're important and we've communicated with them and through this handbook, we want to help choreograph, provide them with some guidance of what we expect. What are their day-to-day employee activities and interactions? And then also we want to play a valuable role in demonstrating our organization's commitment to a culture of compliance. For those of you who remember the last recession and some of the federal legislation that was enacted as a result of the last recession, focus on a culture of compliance. And now if you're a publicly traded company, you really have to have this culture of compliance identified and communicated to your employees. So what do we mean by culture of